These days, cinemas are about more than just movies. They're about experiences. It's winning that Friday night bowling tournament. It's finally beating your brother in laser tag. It's date night with cocktails and a love seat upgrade. Whatever experiences you offer, you need a POS system that can keep up. With over 30 years of development, TAPOS offers a massive feature set, including omni-channel food and ticket sales, embedded CRM, loyalty and membership, custom cloud-based reporting, and third-party integrations with FECs. Learn more at taposapp.com.
I just love seeing the new innovations that are coming out, and I'm always kind of blown away by some of the things that people are trying. And I think that really bodes well for the future of our industry. I'm very bullish on the future.
This is the Box Office Podcast. I'm Daniel Loria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, the pulse of theatrical exhibition. And we are kicking off our daily CinemaCon series brought to you by our partners at TAPOS with a great episode today previewing the biggest topics facing theatrical exhibition at CinemaCon 2025. And in our feature segment in the second half of this episode, we'll be joined by Tim Richards, the CEO of View International, for a great interview looking back at his career and the latest developments going on in the multinational UK-based circuit. That is coming up in the second half of this episode. I'll be joined this week by my colleagues and co-hosts Rebecca Pahle and Chad Kennerk. And before we get started, a quick rundown of the schedule here on Monday, March 31st at CinemaCon. Bright and early morning over at the International Day sessions, starting with a breakfast at 8:30 a.m., going over to a couple of panels at 10:30 a.m., a panel titled Globally Speaking, Different Perspectives, One Common Goal, moderated by Michael O'Leary with a number of senior executives from the industry. Following that, at 11:30 a.m., we've got the Cinema Experience, Shifting Generational Preferences and Opportunities to Leverage Design to Optimize the Guest Experience. That's a mouthful, but you can expect a lot of design and architecture insights there to help maximize revenues. Cameron Mitchell, the executive director of Cinema Association Australasia, is going to be moderating that conversation. Then we've got a couple of breakaway programs here from 11 a.m. to 2:45 p.m. The Independent Theater Owners Coalition is having a closed-door number of sessions at CinemaCon. And from 9 a.m. to 2:45 p.m., really all afternoon, it's a school day, basically, our friends at ICTA are hosting a Cinema Systems Summit. Both those breakaway sessions require special RSVPs, so you'll have to make sure that you're registered for those. And then back to the main program at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, we've got Coca-Cola bringing us special insights on a session that's going to be a little bit more marketing and F&B related before we've got the 6:30 p.m. opening night presentation at the Coliseum. Sony Pictures kicking off the event here in Las Vegas. We'll be recapping that Sony presentation in tomorrow's episode, but today, Rebecca, Chad, welcome back to the podcast. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. We're going to start this morning previewing the biggest questions that the industry is facing in 2025 as we are coming off of an extremely difficult first quarter here. But there are other topics at hand. Let's start with the obvious one, because if you follow the news, tariffs are on and then they're off. There may be, there are realities, there's exceptions, there aren't. It's impossible to see what's going on here.
I'm getting flashbacks to the post-COVID, what's up with the supply chains era that we were in for a while. Granted, essentially, it kind of does boil down to the same questions for exhibitors. What will I be able to get? What can I afford to get? How do I absorb the costs versus passing them on to customers? Hopefully this time around, people won't have trouble getting popcorn containers. But yeah, there are a lot of questions on this one.
Popcorn might be the issue this time around, Rebecca. Mm-hmm. Actually, not that much. I spoke with Rob Novak in an interview that we pre-taped for this very interview series coming up later on in the week here on the Box Office Podcast. Rob Novak heads concessions over at Marcus Theaters, and he's also the president of the Concessions Trade Association, the NAC, rebranding now as the EF&B. He said that he's not too concerned. A lot of those things are purchased and sourced domestically. But where it might be an issue is going to be with tariffs on alcohol. Things like tequila, your margarita Mondays, things like that, that might be impacted. But for more detail on that tariff situation, why hear us think about what's going on? We're going to be bringing insights from the event itself, the potential impact of tariffs at the concession stand. Nothing more to add there, guys, since it's more of a question than an answer that we have. But Chad, I have to turn this over to you as we all take a stab at this. The one question that unfortunately is going to be asked, and it's so cheesy, I'm so over this, but it's an important question to ask, is going to be about AI. Every panel, I'm going to put money on this. I bet you guys one Alto Bar cocktail, which I think is going for half my salary. That's a going rate for these.
I don't know if the tariffs can bump that one up.
Yeah, who knows? I might not be able to afford it by the end of the week. We'll cash it in on Tuesday. But I would wager that there's going to be an AI question in every single panel this year. Chad, do you have any burning questions on AI, or are you just over this?
I don't know if I have any burning questions. I think the conversation around AI has shifted to doom and gloom to how do we use this as a tool? Because I think we've all had enough experience now with AI to know that it's not, at least where it's at right now, it's not going to take over everything. You still need someone using that as a tool.
Daniel, I know that View is a exhibitor that really prides itself on having gotten into AI early. I don't know how much you go into that with the interview with him, Richard.
We go into
in a few minutes, because I was like,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna. If there's one person who knows about the use of AI from a like exhibitor focused perspective, that's another situation of I'm just gonna listen to Tim on this one because I mean I think for a lot of people it's like the data conversation that's been dominating over the last as data and digital capabilities become more sophisticated. It feels very intimidating when you look at it from the outside perspective of AI. You think of Chad, robots and world destroying things. I mean, we use AI for like transcription generation on this podcast.
We use AI every day to produce our publication, which doesn't mean there are any stories produced by AI in our publication. It helps us get our job done, transcribing interviews, copy editing, just proofing things. In the conversation we're going to have in the second half of this episode, Tim Richards goes into how AI is transforming programming at cinemas and how it's going to be transforming the concession stand in the coming years. But we'll have to see what that looks like. I think it's still a buzzword and it's not a reality. I have to see it. Now, I don't think it's going to be a transformative change or anything to fear exactly. I'm not convinced it's going to take anybody's job in the sense that technology as an umbrella term probably already does that. I don't think this is going to significantly alter staffing the way that, I don't know, kiosks have already altered staffing, right? Or digital ticketing have eliminated the need of box office ticket taker positions, for example. So I don't think it's going to be that big, scary monster that it's sometimes purported to be. But at the same time, how can we use AI to make our day-to-day tasks here in this magazine, for example, transcribing, improving audio feeds sometimes when we interview people over the phone? Those little things that aren't immediately apparent, I think, are going to be where AI really makes a difference. But who knows what we're going to hear at this conference.
And I think that's the question for exhibitors coming in is how can I use this? How can this help me make my job easier?
Where do I start?
Yeah, where do I? Yeah, exactly. Where do you begin?
I don't know where the hype ends and where the reality begins when it comes to AI. I'm not sure if CinemaCon 2025 will help us figure that out. I need to see products. I need to see applications. I need to see this actually in the field. I'm not sure we're there yet across the board. But hey, we'll listen from Tim Richards in a little bit, and he'll tell us on how he's applying it to greatest success so far. Now, another big topic that we can't ignore has nothing to do with our tech overlords, but everything to do with our studio partners. We're coming off a nightmare first quarter at the box office. We had to tamp down our projections from 9.3 to 9.7 billion, where we originally started the year at. Right now, after a disastrous Q1 in the marketplace, we're expecting 2025 to finish between 9 and 9.5 billion. I know that's a big swing, but we do expect things to heat up significantly starting on Memorial Day weekend. Just how much of that recovery is going to get us close to that $9.5 billion mark is a question mark. Things won't work. Movies will fail. That is a given. Things that we expect to do well won't. And then we'll have a surprise or two along the way. But the big question mark, I think, facing exhibition is going to be answered at the studio presentations. What's going to patch up the ship? Because it's not great. And if you look at that calendar of Q1, we've been saying this all along. It was always a risky proposition when the entire quarter was headlined by a movie a month, and none of those movies were a guarantee.
As you noted, D'Angelo, these are questions that we in the industry have going into CinemaCon. They're not issues that are going to be solved within a week. But I feel like, the evolving relationship between exhibitors and studios, the terms of who gets to set the terms on who gets those premium screens, on how much exclusivity there is. I mean, I feel like everyone's kind of maybe shying away from competing with each other too strongly, putting their films too close to each other. And you definitely understand why you don't want to be the film that ends up on the short end of that stick.
I mean, if we look at about scheduling, I look at June, I look at July, it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense why there's so much traffic one week to the next over the summer, and we have barren periods in the entire first quarter.
Mm-hmm.
That does not work. You look at September, you start asking questions. You look at October, if that Michael Jackson biopic from Lionsgate sees the light of day, which we all hope it does, and it works, great. If it doesn't, or if it, for whatever reason, doesn't get released because the reporting on that title seems like there is some baggage attached to that movie coming out, then yeah, we're in a bit of a jam. The same way we were last year. It's going to turn out to be kind of a mirror image from 2024. A really bumpy first half of the year. June heats things up. September, October, couple hits and misses, and then a nearly identical November and December period when it comes to titles from studios on specific weekends.
And there are always, those pleasant surprises that we don't see coming, thinking back to Taylor Swift, The Eras Tour, Sound of Freedom from Angel Studios, or even something last year like Terrifier 3, which kind of snuck in there and benefited from no one going to see Joker 2. It's great to have those, and we've spoken at length about how it's necessary to have films across a variety of genres, appealing to a variety of demographics, but they're not going to make up for what should be billion-dollar global tentpoles not delivering, and then it's just crickets at the box office.
That's a major concern.
We've seen recently in a number of studies, the Global Cinema Federation, for example, talking about moviegoers wanting more content. So it seems like there are some missed opportunities. Definitely in Q1, I don't understand why certain films end up on streaming when there's not a lot of competition in theaters.
Especially when we're talking about the need to bring in younger audiences to increase that habitual movie going. I mean, I talk to people in my life, friends and family who aren't tuned in to this space. They've asked about it, what's out? What's out?
It's hard, and it's a harder conversation to wrap our heads around every day. And these are things that we really need the industry to come together and simplify, I think, not only for operators, but also audiences, because it's a massive blind spot in this industry recovering to a $10 billion plus industry domestically. And that's the next question I have facing exhibition. We're looking at another year in the 9 billion range. When are we going to break through? When is that going to happen? We've heard a lot of talk about next year. It sounds like the Mets. That's what theatrical exhibition sounds like sometimes, right?
Don't we got say so that this
close.
Year.
But,
this is the year we. Oh man. Okay, I have a hard out for this recording, so you shouldn't have brought up the Mets. But I'm gonna. No, I mean, I think it's a good question. I don't think anyone who claims to know the answer to that is probably talking out of their rear end. But we do see, and Daniel, this leads us to another question that we have that exhibition has going into this CinemaCon. I know you asked Michael Loria about it in yesterday's episode. That $2.2 billion investment going into the industry to upgrade to premium concepts, to renovate new cinemas. What will that be, and how much is it going to be able to make up for a weak slate?
And here's another dimension of that question. And I do mean this in good faith, but it is something that we're not talking about enough. Is that new spend happening in the place of a cost-cutting measure of something you used to pay more for? So if you go from one, let's say, POS provider to another POS provider, if you go from one mobile app to another mobile app developer, is that an upgrade, or is that because you're spending the money, but where you were spending one, you're spending 0.8 now? That's something we don't really know in terms of, yes, you will spend X amount of dollars, but how much cost optimization is that? Because it's been really dicey for vendors out there. We have to say it. Our friends at the trade show that's starting out tomorrow here in Vegas, they've been hurting. I mean, many companies that are vendors in the cinema space are waiting for significant investing from exhibition that just has not materialized. So that 2.2 billion, I love to hear that. It can't come soon enough. I think based on everything I've heard from major executives in this industry is that if there is one new build, that new build is going to be state of the art, and it's also going to be there in place of maybe 2 or 3 sites that weren't working and that are now closed permanently. So yes, there's a spend, but is that spend leading to growth, or is that spend a way for us to coexist in this reality of a box office domestically under 10 billion?
Are we comparing it to 2019 spend, or are we comparing it to 2024 spend?
Yeah. Big question mark here. Another big issue that we talked about in our preview episode that came out on Thursday is the role that streaming is going to have in this industry moving forward. There's been a lot written about Amazon MGM being the first streamer to promote its theatrical slate at CinemaCon 2025 in the main stage. And then when we all sat down together to do our preview episode on all the movies that we're looking forward to being showcased at this event, there were like 3 theatrical titles from Amazon MGM.
Yeah, not 3 that we were looking forward to. Like maybe total. Like under half a dozen titles. And I don't know, maybe there are going to be some huge announcements. I think, Chad, you called it correctly when there's going to be a screening of something to fill up those 2 hours. But I mean, at least Amazon is going. Apple, I don't know what's going on.
We'll get to Apple in a little bit. But Chad, I want to hear more from you, because I think your theory is correct. How is Amazon going to fill up 2 hours between 8 and 10 p.m. at the Coliseum at this event with 3 scheduled titles? That's very hard to do. So I think your theory of announcements, probably announcements that have already been made by the time you listen to this episode, plus maybe extended looks or a full-on screening, I don't know. I'm leaning towards that. What do you think is going to play out from the Amazon MGM presentation?
Yeah, I think since we recorded yesterday's episode, we've already gotten several announcements from Amazon MGM.
I love it when that happens. Right after you record.
Yeah, Lizzo's going to be starring as Rosetta Tharpe in a biopic. That one didn't specifically say theatrical, but we do have 2 others that have mentioned theatrical. Another Colleen Hoover adaptation, Verity, which has Anne Hathaway.
And Anne Hathaway was pretty recently in a rom-com that went straight to streaming and did pretty well, right? I mean, you can't pretty well, with the caveat that their streaming numbers are unverifiable.
Yeah. So we've got that Colleen Hoover adaptation with Anne Hathaway, Dakota Johnson. And then they also announced a Nicholas Hoult, David Leitch bank heist thriller. And we also now from Amazon have news that Amy Pascal and David Heyman will be the producers of the next James Bond film. So maybe we will get some James Bond news at CinemaCon.
I mean, we got to fill those 2 hours somehow, because I look at that slate that's going direct to Amazon Prime Video, a title like Another Simple Favor. You put that movie on the calendar in April, It's going to help. It has a May 1 release date on Amazon Prime Video, straight to streaming. You release that theatrically, maybe a week or two after Thunderbolts, that would help. I don't know. I still have a lot of hesitation in saying that Amazon MGM is all in on theatrical. I think anything helps, of course, and I'm really happy to see them presenting here at CinemaCon. But I've got a lot of doubts as to what we can see here and what level of commitment we're going to see from the entire studio in making theatrical its first destination platform moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, they're definitely the studio, I would say, that has the most to prove to exhibitors at CinemaCon, possibly in the last 10 years worth of CinemaCons. I'll be definitely curious to hear what they have to say. There's a presentation going late into the night.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna make me skip dinner to watch a presentation, I'm betting that you're going to go big on this. They really have to make an impact, because if I have my doubts, I don't own a movie theater. I don't even own movie theater stock. It'd be unethical for me to own stock in movie theaters. I'm not financially involved in this other than the fact that I work in a trade publication covering movie theaters. But there's a lot of people in that Coliseum auditorium whose livelihoods depend on having a robust theatrical slate, and they're going to have to win them over. Amazon MGM has a lot of heavy lifting. It is the one studio with the most to prove at CinemaCon 2025. We won't talk too much about Apple because they're not showing
They're not talking
up.
too much about themselves with regards to
Right.
theatrical, so I don't know what we could say about it.
Recent reporting claiming that Apple is losing $1 billion a year in their Apple TV Plus thing. Now, that's a drop in the bucket for these guys, but where does Apple go from here? I think that's not something that CinemaCon is going to answer at all, but that's, I think, a question a lot of us are going to be asking each other. Okay, Amazon showed up. We know that, Netflix is never going to join the party.
Netflix is in it for Netflix. We know that.
Yeah, we know that. Yeah. And you know what? If you've got an IMAX theater, good for you. You get Narnia for 2 weeks, and then everybody else moves on as usual. But Apple, that seemed to be a fairly close partner of the theatrical industry, has gone silent. Filmmaker John Watts, that directed the movie Wolves for Apple last year, that was supposed to go theatrical. They made a 180-degree turn on that, decided to dump it straight on their streaming service. John Watts came out, blasted Apple, saying that that was not at all what he expected from working with them.
And this is John Watts. I mean, he directed one of the most commercially successful trilogies of all time with the Marvel Tom Holland Spider-Man.
Movie business. John Watts is not in the TV movie business. He was very unhappy being treated that way by Apple. It's not that we're going to learn anything from him at CinemaCon, but I think it's going to be one of the major questions that people are going to be talking about at the event. What can we expect from these guys? Say what you will about Amazon MGM. At least they're showing up. At least they have half a dozen titles that are going to your theaters. What does Apple have other than F1, which I think between you and me, it looks like Warner's is putting a lot of muscle into promoting? I really haven't seen too much in the way of Apple saying that this exists yet.
It's been a bait and switch from Apple up to this point. So yeah, definitely the streamers are always a big question, always a big subject at CinemaCon. You can count on that.
And then I guess the last question we're going to be asking ourselves, and I'm not sure again if this is going to be openly discussed at any of the panels, but it is something that I think we have to ask ourselves. Are we in a cinema entertainment center bubble? Is this a trend, or is this a new reality?
These are not cheap or quick things to build.
No, they're not, Rebecca. No. And can they stand the test of time? And I think a lot of circuits have gotten that formula right. I look at Synergy, that has a long-standing way of doing things and have had great success with it. And I see a lot of investment from other circuits going into this space. I don't know how much this grows. Are we in peak cinema entertainment center? Is this going to drop off after a while, or is this just going to level out? I don't know where we go in terms of movie theaters that have all of these amenities. This is a real estate play that can be quite costly if it falls out of fashion. I'm not decrying, I'm not predicting anything here. I'm just saying This is fairly new as opposed to alcohol service or expanded menus. This is square footage. This is stuff that you're going to keep if you make that investment. All of these questions are items that we hope to get more information on this week here in Las Vegas. It's always nice to be back. And before we go into our feature segment of today, an interview with Tim Richards from View International, I wanted to ask you guys right now, in real time, as we listen to this episode, settle into Vegas, we're wearing, maybe the nice shoes that we break out for this conference, comfortable ones, I hope. What's the number one thing that you always look forward to when you're back at Caesars?
It's the same answer for me every year. It's the trade show floor and seeing all the candies. That ain't going to change. I'm sorry. I got my loyalties. Okay.
And that opens tomorrow again. So please do visit all our vendor partners there. Chad, this is going to be your fourth CinemaCon with us?
Third, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, what's your tradition? What are you looking forward to doing there?
I mean, I think just hearing from the creatives, hearing from talent, hearing from people that are behind the product that our studio friends are putting out is
and their enthusiasm. Their enthusiasm
exactly.
for the cinema, specifically the experience, their hometown cinemas. Yeah, that's always the best part of hearing these presentations.
It's always a great part of attending this event. And don't forget to subscribe. We have daily episodes coming out this whole week. The Box Office Podcast presented by TAPOS. And now on to our feature segment, my interview with Tim Richards, the CEO of View International, who we do have to mention, guys, by the way, was recently appointed Commander of the Order of the British Empire, thanks to his achievements over at the BFI and obviously working for View. That interview is coming up right after this commercial break.
At CinemaCon 2025, Barco invites you to find the ideal match for your cinema. Barco's purpose-built theater and cinema-focused experience in Las Vegas features cutting-edge solutions and exciting laser-powered demos. Barco's cinema experts are on hand to help you discover technology that elevates every frame. If you're at the show, don't miss them in Roman 3 and 4 and at their exclusive happy hour at the Vista Bar on April 2nd. And for everyone else, you can learn more about Barco's innovative solutions at barco.com/cinema.
And we're back here on the Box Office Podcast with this year's Global Achievement in Exhibition honoree, Tim Richards, the founder and CEO of View International. Tim, thank you so much for joining us.
No, pleasure to be here.
Now, Tim, I want to start by going a little bit over your career in this business. Now, I think over 35 years working in exhibition and distribution, but it wasn't always going to be that case. You started out in Wall Street. What were you thinking, man? Did anyone warn you? Did you have any close friends to give you a heads up on what you were getting into?
I was a New York M&A lawyer, and I didn't have these long-term expectations that I'd be joining the industry, but what happened with me is I was a New York lawyer. I moved to London to really look after and help look after the common market in 1992. And I joined one of the big law firms in the city of London. When the recession hit in 1990, the credit markets died, and people forget how bad that recession really was. I responded to a small ad in the Financial Times for a position with one of the studios that was unnamed. And I had 13 interviews with Paramount and Universal. And my first 3 or 4 interviews, I'm not cocky or arrogant by nature, but I was confident because I was not really looking for a new job. I was just kind of bored because I had nothing to do at the law firm. And by my 5th interview, I suddenly realized I desperately want this job. And at that point, your interviewing skills are gone. But that was the beginning, and that was exciting days. I was with UCI, and it was kind of a classic, if you build it, they will come moment where we were just operating and developing and opening new cinemas around the world. And we were also overseeing at that time the Metro Cinema chain, which was a leftover from the kind of the glory days from the kind of the 40s, 50s, and 60s of kind of global cinema. We were looking after cinemas really worldwide from Panama to Egypt at that time.
A different time in exhibition in terms of how you handled a multinational operation. You're a multinational exhibitor today. Some stark differences, I guess. Is it easier because of the new technology?
I can remember one cinema that I was looking after in Cairo, and actually there was 2, one in Cairo and one in Alexandria. And they had some of the original CinemaCon projectors that were about 50 years old. And you replace a few parts and you put some more oil in there and you're good to go.
They'll outlive us all, Tim. They're going to be there long, long after we're gone.
Absolutely right. And the digital technology is, a quantum leap forward, but it's still, got a 10 to 15 year lifespan on it.
Right. Yeah, no. And obviously, that's just one of the many changes you've seen. There was a period on the studio side, of course, at Warner Brothers. And then you decide to start your own exhibition circuit. Can you take me to that period in your life where you're in distribution and get pulled back into exhibition?
I had moved over to Los Angeles and joined Warner Brothers in 1994. And it was a really exciting time because, again, we were running really hard, opening cinemas worldwide. In 1996, Bob Daly and Terry Semel took over Warner Music, and things changed very quickly. I mean, we had spent a lot of time with Bob and Terry in those days, and suddenly, they had their responsibilities doubled, and they didn't have quite the focus that they'd had before. And then in 1987, in the AOL Time Warner report, it labeled the cinema division as a non-core asset, which is never a good sign. So the writing was definitely on the wall in terms of where they were going with the company or with that particular group. And I started really just getting out of positions and selling markets worldwide. And so I kind of knew that there was not a long-term prospect there. I've always been entrepreneurial at heart. And I decided it was a really tough decision because the dot-com crash, the dark clouds were on the horizon. I mean, everyone was predicting it and thinking it was going to happen. No one knew when it was going to happen, but I was trying to raise money for the company at the time. I had a 5-year contract with Warner Brothers that was sitting there, corner desk at the studio, and I left and moved into my garage. And it was one of those moments where people who knew me knew that that was what I wanted to do. Everyone else thought I'd completely lost my mind. But I look back on that day, and it was probably the most exciting and terrifying period professionally.
Well, here you are now, the founder and CEO of View International, a leading global circuit. It wasn't easy. Well, it never is easy opening an exhibition circuit, but at the turn of the 2000s, a lot of things going on there in the business. It wasn't the most stable time to enter the marketplace.
No, it was an interesting one. And also, you learn a lot when you set out on your own. And when I was a senior executive at Warner Brothers, doors were open everywhere, worldwide. And I had a lot of friends in every major market in the world, and both in the industry and outside of the industry, or suppliers to the industry. And what was interesting and a little bit depressing was when I left the studio and set up on my own, I called up all of these friends of mine and told them what I was doing, and half of them returned my calls and half of them didn't.
You're still waiting probably for the other half, I'm sure.
No, but you really realize who your real friends are. And most of that group are still with us today, or I'm still working with them today.
Especially right now, the pandemic is just such an old topic, but we do have to talk about it in terms of the recovery, especially from a multinational perspective. The way the UK Ireland market is doing, very different than others. You're in a number of countries. Tim, what markets are looking better than others? What needs a little bit more of a push, and what's close to a level that is viable to grow again?
Look, the pandemic is something that I don't discuss really anymore because we're looking forward, not back anymore. But just spending a few seconds on it, it was particularly frustrating because as an industry globally, as we know, we set a new box office record of $42.5 billion in 2019. As a company, we set a new profit record. And then within a space of 3 weeks, we closed every cinema in 8 countries. It was one of those kind of apocalyptic moments. But, I look at what happened, and as an industry pulled together and we all helped each other through that horrible period. And we were not, at the time, nothing was broken. I mean, you can always tweak around the edges and improve and enhance, but effectively nothing was broken. Nothing was broken with the companies, and operators and exhibitors worldwide were innovating and investing and improving and refurbishing. And when we came out of it, it was a couple of years of just trying to survive. And then the strikes, SAG-AFTRA and WGA hit. What I think we really noticed, and this kind of goes to the recovery of the different markets, particularly across Europe, is we recognized that a lot of people really thought that the two strikes were a Hollywood issue or a Southern California or a Los Angeles issue. And it wasn't. If you're a filmmaker or involved in any sector of the industry, your dream is to do a film in Hollywood. And that's ultimately your goal. And even if you do end up going back to your markets, you want to do one big project with Hollywood. And so we saw filmmakers who weren't even a part of WGA or SAG-AFTRA actually down tools and stop production. So we saw across Europe, filmmakers just stopped for almost a year. There's this complex matrix web of film production where everybody wants the best crews and sets and locations and everything else. And it tends to run on a 3 or 4 or 5 month kind of rolling basis. When that matrix is thrown out of sync like it was, even though the strikes ended, we know film production did not suddenly start again in January of last year. And it took months to get that synchronized and back up and humming again, which was probably, speaking to most of the filmmakers, didn't really happen in earnest until March or April. Mm-hmm. So we're only talking 7 or 8 months ago. And so the film production was slow to come back. And independent film production and local film production across all of our markets was also very slow. And different markets came out of it at different points. I mean, Germany came out very aggressively, very quickly, very successfully. The German government was hugely supportive of all companies, and particularly media companies like ours in Germany. I mean, every market had its kind of nuances in terms of the level of support that we received from government to get us through the pandemic. Italy had a very slow start, and they were not supportive of the industry at all. They were trying to protect a very small number of independent and art house producers and exhibitors. In the last couple of years, they realized that they really had to kickstart the entire business again, and they put hundreds of millions of euros into film production and into exhibition, principally through the way of tax credits. And that really started to get the market going again. And what happened initially, as you can imagine, there was no filter. So we had a huge number of movies, none of which people wanted to see. So the government kind of recognized that very quickly, and they put in kind of a group to really filter and monitor where it was going to make sure that they were viable and potentially commercial films. And we've seen now some huge successes as a consequence. And the Italian market is back. The UK market, comparing it to the kind of continental European markets, has been a little bit slower to come back. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people who are kind of scratching their heads trying to work out why. I'm not worried at all because I've seen what's happened with specific movies that have been released and the records that have been broken in the last 2 or 3 years. But it just seems to be a little bit slower to come back. So there's kind of an answer, a specific answer for every country.
You're right. It really does change on a market by market, year by year basis, the way this global recovery effort has gone. I'm curious to hear your perspective on the North American market. Obviously, you're very close to the North American market, but you still have a perspective that's a little bit outside of it. Where do you think exhibition is right now on a competitive basis in US and Canada?
I've worked in 45 markets around the world, but never the US, even though I lived in the US for extended periods of time. And I'm also American alongside of Canadian and British. I think the US, like the rest of the world, has gone through a very difficult time. And I think, we've seen what's happened with some of the bigger players. We've seen, unfortunately, Regal go through a Chapter 11 process. But I think from the outside looking in, what I'm seeing right now is a stronger industry after everything that everyone's been through. And spending time there in the last 12 to 18 months in particular, it's really amazing to see people spending money again, refurbishing their cinemas, putting in recliner seats, and just making the entire experience better for their customers. And I'm very bullish on the US. I think, the worst is over. And I look at some of the companies, I think particularly companies like Cinemark, who have really stayed the course through this period, I think probably as strongly or better than anyone has. And I think, Sean Gamble and the whole team there deserve credit for what they've done and, the company that they've kind of steered and built over the years.
It's interesting to see how this recovery is going to really accelerate in the summer season here in the US, not only in the US, but globally, with a number of releases coming out really through the summer into Q3 and Q4. Looking at the View perspective, I'm thinking in terms of the investments that you guys are going to be making in the future. And correct me if I'm wrong, but just from attending Cine Europe and listening to you speak over the years, it seems like View's investment priorities in 21 and 22 were very aggressive on a reseeding across the circuit. And 23, 24, I start hearing a little bit more about distribution. And I know you've made great strides, not only in programming in your cinemas, but also getting films out there. Where do you see View investing in the second half of this decade?
We went through a very painful restructuring in 22. And we would have been okay if it hadn't been for the strikes. And we had to have a second, smaller restructuring that we did in February of last year. And when that was done, we came out of that second restructuring with an extra £50 million that our shareholders gave us. We came out with a very strong balance sheet and very close to normal leverage levels for an operating company. That was after 4 years of hell. And I suddenly had this weight lifted off my shoulders at that time, realizing that it was genuinely over. And we literally have not stopped ever since. And we have been really focused on renovating and rolling out a new experience for our customers. And our focus is really on the journey from the parking lot to the seat. And our goal right now is to make that as quick and effortless and even exciting as possible for our customers. So we are rolling out right now of all of our new sites, and we've got quite a few coming out. We are putting in new gates. We've got a new concession concept where we've actually completely gotten rid of our concession stand, and we've put a flow through where people can pick up their popcorn and Coke, and we've got an enhanced offer because we've got the space to do it now of products available for our customers, and then a very quick checkout process, which will initially be by barcode and eventually it'll be Amazon.com style exit with cameras and AI. And that is ultimately our goal. We recognized that there's a segment of our audience that are looking for a different experience within the cinema. So after 10 years, we've introduced a brand new seat for the very first time that we're calling an Ultra Luxe. It's a very big recliner, reclines a little bit more. It's got a really gorgeous, polished, exposed carbon table between the two seats, and then it has a very large carbon table between the pairs of the seats in the auditorium. The killer part, it has an integrated actual wine cooler that will actually chill a bottle of champagne or wine for our customers. It has cushions and a blanket. And we are rolling those out. We've put them into Munich now. We put them into Southport, Swindon, and we are running as hard as we can to get those out. So our focus has really been on upgrading, refurbishing. We've purchased half a dozen new cinemas. We're opening up new cinemas. And then, as you said, we saw an opportunity for film distribution. We saw that there was a market out there for smaller independent films, British films, European films, that wasn't really being catered to. And it really, the genesis of it goes back to 2005, 2006, when we teamed up with Mark Samuelson and the Isle of Man with Cinema NX. And we started doing movies and kind of production credits going back then. then we got busy and we kind of left it on the side. But it was always our goal to get back into that space. And we were very close to the director of C'è Ancora Domani, There Is Still Tomorrow in Italy last year. And when I saw the movie, I mean, we were all just so completely blown away by the film. And, the director had taken us out for dinner because we helped them out in Italy release it. And they took us out for dinner and we were just talking about, because I had said, this is a movie that needs to be seen. And there's an audience out there. And they hadn't really gone anywhere with it. So we said, well, look, we'll do it for you. And we'll take it into the UK. And we didn't even have a company yet. So we just had kind of a thought. And it worked really well. It worked exactly how we'd hoped it would do. And then we did Bluey last year. And both of those movies, did extremely well for us as a distributor. And at that point, we thought, okay, well, let's formalize this. We've created a new brand. We've got some marketing muscle behind it. And we were very, very fortunate to get what I think is a real superstar in that independent distribution space, Yves Gabreau, who, had come from Soda Pictures and then Modern Pictures and had built up an incredible track record. And she is right now, as we speak, building a team internally with us. And we are hoping to get our first few films out in the next couple of months.
And if you look at exhibitors going to distribution in major markets, we're still in the early days of this, really. The leaders right now are you guys in the UK, obviously with a specialty perspective on the films you're releasing. AMC in the US is taking more of an event cinema approach with theatrical releases so far. Do you think there's a future, a long-term future in this, in major markets for exhibitors to say, I'm going to fill that gap of having one less studio? I'm going to fill that gap of having a decreased film slate in order to be able to survive in the coming years.
When View as a brand started in 2003, we very intentionally did not call it View Cinemas. We called it View Entertainment because we saw that we had cinemas in every major city in Europe, and we saw the actual auditoria as being a perfect soundstage that lent itself very well to other forms of entertainment. And we were, as a company first, or kind of a global first, we worked with Brian May for 8 months, and we did a friends and family of Queen's tour in 2005. And then in 2007, our goal was always live. And we did a world first. We had the rights we worked with Genesis, and we had the rights to broadcast it to cinemas across Europe, and we did it across 44 cinemas in the UK. This is many, many years ago. So we've been doing this for a long time. I'm a big believer in event cinema generally, but not at the expense of our main business, which is feature films. This is meant to be complementary, to fill our screens in quieter times, not to go head to head with our core business.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing it, especially in the box office receipts, how you really have to make sure you're ready for that off peak, a good flow of titles. Part of that challenge has been making sure your programming is really up to par to where things are, to where your audience could be. And I understand that you've actually employed AI to help some of those bookings, some of those programming tasks to quite success over the past couple of years.
Yeah, we've been using AI now for going on 9 years, and we've only started to really talk about it in the last 12 months. It really grew out of my frustration. We are, as a company, highly analytical, and the one area of the business that always drove me crazy was film booking, and because that was mostly done by gut and a tiny little bit of analysis behind it. And we started on that journey, and we interviewed quite a few different tech firms across the world. And we ended up with a group out of the Bay Area in San Francisco. And we spent 2 years with them, 53 models in beta. And around halfway through that process, we realized that we were really seriously on to something interesting. And by the time that we started increasing and rolling it out across more and more of our cinemas, we knew that it was definitely going to be the future. And we've been using it very, very successfully now for the last 8-9 years. We play 50% more movies than our major competitors at any one time, because the AI knows that there's a market for, it just might be a couple of screens later on for a family film or a horror film or whatever it might be. And it's been a really big win for us. And sorry, in the foreign films, which kind of ties in with our Lumiere films, is we play 46% of our movies are foreign language. And again, that's because the AI has identified right across all of our markets where all of our demographics are and who wants to see what movie.
And it's something that you mentioned a little bit ago. You're now extending AI to the concession stand, to more of a retailer way of engaging with customers to get them quicker through that checkout aisle, get them everything they need for their cinema trip.
Yeah, no, we've really doubled down on AI. I mean, I think that's going to be a big part of the future for all exhibitors worldwide. And, we've brought on a new head CIO right now to really help drive that whole experience. It's a lot of work, but, as we know, it's moving at lightning speed and we want to be on top of it.
No, thank you so much for all the time you've given us. I want to finish this interview with asking a question looking into the future. What factors does exhibition need in order to continue setting new benchmarks in the second half of this decade and beyond?
I mean, looking around globally right now, exhibitors are doing the right thing. I mean, no business can ever be complacent. And when you look around at what some of the different exhibitors are doing in Asia and the US and the Middle East and Australia, it's really exciting. And I just love seeing the new innovations that are coming out, and blown away by some of the things that people are trying. And I think that really bodes well for the future of our industry. I'm very bullish on the future. I think when you have the studios as committed as they are to feature film production, when you have a reinvigorated Paramount now coming, and with Larry and David Ellison coming in with Skydance, when you have Apple and Amazon realizing that this is the best way to monetize their films and they're coming to us, I think we're going to have a great future. And I think exhibitors globally are getting ready for it.
And a big thank you to Tim Richards of View International for joining us on this episode. Earlier, you heard from myself, Daniel Loria, and my colleagues, Chad Kennerk and Rebecca Pahle. Don't forget to subscribe. We've got new episodes bringing you the latest from CinemaCon 2025. We're available on every top podcast platform out there, and we will talk to you again tomorrow.